All right, everybody, welcome back. Bio Bros, episode 9 on all streaming platforms. Look around for all of us everywhere. Instagram, TikTok as well. Been on there. But you might notice we've been gone for a while. Holiday season caught up with all of us. Way too busy. Very hard to get scheduling time in here, especially all our time zone differences and stuff. Been a bit of a disaster, but we're back. We're back with weekly episodes. We're not going to be vanishing like that all the time. So today we are going to be talking about some of the biggest news in 2024 in biology, specifically animals and plants, of course. Little hint on some dinosaurs because I've been getting into those recently in the break as well. And just a few little things. Of course, a lot more happens. Biology is a huge science. Things are happening every single day, but a couple things in there. So I'll lead us off with my favorite one. Well, one of my favorite things that happened was the reclassification of the genus Ophiophagus, which is the king cobras. There's now 4 species of king cobras, and they are Ophiophagus hanna, which is what we originally had. We had just that one, Bungaris, Kalinga, and Salvantana. We now have 4 different species of king cobras rather than just the one. Since 1836, actually, it's been a disaster. There really wasn't great information on all of this taxonomically, and not a lot of things to cross-reference and all that. Finally, it's been done. This is a lot better. I wouldn't be surprised to see more stuff come out now that we have a better system for referencing and all of that. But it's really cool that we got this done. There's finally some distinction between these because there's been not known, but suspected that there's different species for a long time. People have been able to tell. They've been like, "All right, these are a little different. They get bigger over here, or smaller. They're a little different." And now it's that pretty neat. I'm a big fan of that. And great snakes. Alex, I know you aren't as into the venomous snakes, but it is
Yeah.
pretty neat with all the king cobra stuff. You gotta love those guys.
Oh, yeah, no, king cobras are amazing, and it is actually really cool to see them splitting up what they thought was, like, just sub or localities and things like that into actual true species, similar to, like, what they did with the anacondas last year, with the green anacondas,
Oh yeah,
where they split up the one to the other.
yeah, and they had that whole. I'm sure you guys have all seen it. They're like, the world's biggest snake was just discovered. Not really. The
Yeah,
world's biggest snake was just reclassified, and it made it so that there was a new world's biggest snake, which is the anaconda. Same thing happened here. I believe Bungaris is the new technical true king cobra, the biggest of all of them. So it'd be Ophiophagus bungaris rather than Ophiophagus hanna. But it's the same thing, man. Like, it wasn't that these were just discovered, nobody knew about them. We knew about these snakes, we just had them under the wrong name, and now we renamed them. So, there's not a new world's biggest venomous snake, it's just that we realized that we were talking about 2 snakes when we thought we were talking about 1.
yeah,
So, that is the thing, I was gonna let Alex go, but I'm actually gonna go twice in a row on 2 different things because that's a really good segue. So, when things get discovered, saying that in air quotes, sometimes it just means classified, and news articles and things don't articulate that very well. So, Kew Gardens, the Royal Botanical Gardens over in the UK, they're one of the biggest and uh, best botanical gardens around. They named 149 plant species last year. They didn't discover those, but they are technically new to science because they're officially described. We have proven that these are different and new. So, some of those plants have been known for a long, long time. We've known that this is a different species, but finally we were able to prove it. And so you'll see all those articles about people who have they discovered 400 new species last year, because that 149 is just from one garden, and that's just plants. Hundreds and hundreds of species got described and newly discovered too. Somebody just found this and was like, "What in the world's that?" And everyone's like, "I don't know." Uh, but they just described it. It is a lot of work, and it is something to note, though. 149 is out of one botanical garden. That's super neat, and they really, had to put in some work. So those might be new. There's all new names in there, different cool stuff. It's definitely worth looking into. Obviously, I'm not going to name every single new species that got described, but it's pretty cool that this stuff is happening. We're still discovering and describing and reclassifying all these animals, and we're not even scratching the surface. We have so many more species to go. Only a matter of time before we describe and discover some real game-changing stuff.
Oh yeah, I actually to kind of piggyback off of that, I did find an article that I found very interesting of a new species being described, or well, new. I guess not. I wouldn't say reclassified. It was they realized it was a new species and not like a locality kind of thing. And it was in Yuan, China. It is the you or the mountain pit viper. So they realized there was a new species and they named it O Ovophis jenkinsii, um, in honor of the herpetologist Robert Hank William Garfield Jenkins. Um, and this was back. They just like redid this in September, um, and it is just found up in the Yuan Mountains of China, which is another just that it's crazy how we are finding things like this all the time, like new species that they did not realize, and then they're doing. As science progresses, they're finding even more species too because of like genetic testing and genetic differences and stuff like that. So they're realizing what they thought were two of the same species are actually two completely different species, um, which I just think is really cool too. That as science grows, we find and discover more, and we're able to reclassify stuff.
Yeah, and that's important for conservation too, because now that we know that these 2 things are separate, we can treat them separately, and potentially one animal might only be stuck not stuck, but it might only live in one mountain range, and we thought it was a common species, but it's actually not with more research, so we can make sure to protect that mountain, which that exact topic is one of Alex's news stories it was actually kinda carrying on into this year, but we felt like we should probably talk about it because it's kind of a hot topic, and it doesn't need to be that hot.
Yeah, and the story that Shaw's referencing was Fish and Wildlife Services put a emergency ruling to apply for a 240-day temporary listing of the blue tree monitor or Varanus mac macrae. I butchered that, but the blue tree monitor. They put a 240-day temporary listing of them onto the endangered species list. So they fall under the same categories as any other species under the Endangered Species Act. They'd have the same protections and things like that. And a lot of people are kind of putting it up in uproar. They're like, "Oh, well, they're banning them like from us getting more from the wild and things like that," which really isn't a bad thing. Um, and this it's seeming more and more like Florida or not Florida. Fish and Wildlife Services are going to make this a permanent ruling, or at least they put in an act to also make this a permanent ruling at the same time as putting in the temporary listing, because they are a pretty endangered species already in the wild, and they're being collected like crazy for the pet trade, on top of all of their forests being destroyed in Indonesia for houses and people. Um, and all that kind of stuff. So it's really not a bad thing to put these protections on them and stop us from getting more from the wild. And it really won't affect the captive population like a lot of people are acting like it will. At least I don't see it doing that because it's similar to like bearded dragons. We can't get new bloodlines for bearded dragons. We haven't been able to get new bloodlines for bearded dragons for many, many years now, and they're still doing fine. Um,
Yeah. I would compare it more to Galapagos tortoises, just because those are under the same protection. They fall under that exact same act, and
True.
people are kind of freaking out. They're like, "Oh," but the biggest one I see that drives me up a wall is people are like, "But what about insurance populations?" Okay, you clearly don't understand how insurance populations work. Taking an animal out of the wild where it's totally fine to make it your pet that you're thinking about maybe breeding one day is not an insurance population. That animal will never go back into the wild because of all sorts of reasons, specifically one of the biggest ones. Even if this animal was given over to somebody who has the authority to do that, they're not going to give it because of biosecurity, right? Exactly like with people, when Europeans came over to the Americas, lots of disease got spread, right? Same thing. When you go over to different countries, different diseases and things happen, it's not worth it, right? You could take out that whole island, all the reptiles, amphibians, everything on there with a disease that you didn't even know was there. So big problem there. And second, unless you're working with like a zoo, directly with them, and that is the project, is this is the insurance population project that has everything very, very well documented, very clean. It's a much more intensive process than people realize. That animal's offspring too will never go back into the wild. You have to be very, very, very sure everything you're doing is right, and there's lots of oversight from all sorts of governing boards. Insurance populations have nothing to do with this act at all. It's not gonna happen. Yes, if these animals get more rare in captivity and in the pet trade, that's okay. That's fine. I would way rather have these in the wild and have that population rebound, and then maybe we can take them off and we can do some more imports, and then we can have them back as pets. I am in favor of this ban. Apparently, it's controversial. I didn't think it should be. I think if you're an animal lover like we are, and I assume you are if you're listening to this, you would like to protect them, but apparently it's pretty controversial, and I don't think it's that big of a deal.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's mostly controversial because one thing with the reptile hobby that is becoming more and more apparent, is that a lot of people turning out more and more people are not in it for the animals. They're in it for the money. And
Yeah,
especially with like a blue tree monitor, people those go for thousands. Um
yeah, that like, each individual lizard, you're paying $2,000 plus for it.
Easily.
This is a this is an expensive animal, which I also agree with Alex. I think that's why people are making a bigger deal of it, and I think the more vocal people are people who financially benefit from this.
Yeah. Because if it was something like a Savannah monitor, people would not be going insane about it because they're a $20 animal and less people care about it. Um, Even though arguably there's way more wild caught Savannah monitors in the hobby than there are blue tree monitors.
Yeah, I mean, that's not even arguably. The reason that
Yeah.
Savannah monitors are $30 is because they're all wild caught,
Yeah.
and there's so many of them. But yeah, I 100% agree. I definitely think that a lot of people are fairly short-sighted on this, or they legitimately do not understand how not conservation, insurance populations work, which is okay. You're allowed to not know things, but where I have issues with it is when you're willfully ignorant on something. You're allowed not know and learn and have opinions change. That happens to me all the time. And I'm sure we'll look through all these old casts and people will be like, "Oh, well, you flip-flopped your opinions." Like, "No, I just learned more." And that's okay. Um, but in this scenario, it's a good opportunity to learn about insurance populations, be like, "You know what? Taking those animals out is the same as killing them, as far as that island's population of animals is concerned. It's the same as killing them. It's they will not go back. Their offspring will never go back. They're never gonna contribute back to their native ecosystem again, unless you follow some very, very specific rules, and you're just not. You would know very clearly if you were part of that program."
Yeah, I mean, they are a to be an insurance that policies, you basically have to be a zoo, especially with animals like tree monitors. Like, animals like crocodilians and stuff are a bit different, obviously, because those are not, uh, species that are super easily kept, and they're not like a house species. Um, so the biosecurity part of it's a little bit different because they have to be kept outside no matter where you are, basically.
Yeah. But you would still know if you were part of the insurance population programs, like, that's something
Yeah,
you would it's
you would
it's
know.
very clearly known what you're doing.
Yeah,
You're not gonna volunteer and be like, "Hey, wait, I had some baby blue tree monitors. I'll donate 1 or 2 to go back to the island." They're not gonna
yeah, no,
that's not how it
they're not
works.
doing that.
It's not a it's not the Hunger Games, you're not volunteering as tribute. You would know. You would know very, very clearly.
Yeah, and on top of the biosecurity with the blue tree miners, it's also if they know nothing about the genetics, they're not gonna send it. Because there could be a genetic defect from that species that doesn't, or like not a species, that specific pairing that doesn't show up on the first offspring, but maybe their offspring's offspring will start showing it and it'll just go from there. And it's unless they know every detail about that animal, they're not sending them out into the wild.
Yeah, and also, like, you what if that monitor, that blue tree monitor, has 5% green tree monitor in it, and you don't even know? Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're conserving a species, that is a lot, and that's just something they can't take risks with, so it is a good thing. I'm in favor of this ban. It is overall better for the world, which sometimes you gotta take one on the chin. Sorry,
Oh
getting
yeah,
blue tree monitor might be a little harder now, might cost you a little more, but overall better for the world, I'll take it.
yeah. You may, and also similar to like the percentage of like green tree monitor possibly in there and things like that. You made me think of is a great example of that is the Florida panther. There is no true Florida panthers anymore. All of the mountain lions and panthers or cougars, however you want to call it, in Florida are now from the Texas locality or elsewhere. There is no true Florida locality panthers anymore, and that's because their conservation that they didn't work with them specifically. They brought over a lot from Texas and brought over a lot from the east other parts of the US, and they just didn't preserve specific genetics and stuff. And that's an example of like a genetic disaster because there's no true Florida Panthers anymore because of it.
Yeah, that's perfect. That was a good example of why these things matter so much because we've messed it up before. But I'll move on to my next bit of news. We're going into dinosaurs, actually. So I like dinosaurs. I want to do a couple dinosaur episodes, and this is a fun one. It is another new species, but this is super cool. Look up pictures of this. It's a very, very cool animal. So, Mark A. Lowen and Joseph J.W. Sarich, they published an article came out this year, well, I guess last year, 2024, of a new genus and species of Ceratopsian. Like it sounds, Ceratopsian, Ceratops, Triceratops, frilled animals, right? Well, frilled lizard, frilled, all those guys, Ceratopsians. They named this guy the Lokiceratops rangiformis, named after the Norse god Loki. Sure, most of you guys know him from Marvel because its frill looks like Loki's helmet. It's a really cool looking creature, very interesting, and they just published that that guy came out. Found they found the holotypes in the Loki quarry, which they call it, which is just outside of the Judith River Formation. Yeah, just a good old formation in the United States, actually. So you're here. Lots of cool fossils in the United States if you're from here. Utah, Wyoming, Green River formations, all that kind of stuff. Really cool. Lots of cool stuff. And Very cool animal, came out just this year. This is a new deal, very interesting, probably one of the most interesting looking ceratopsians. Lots of horns on there. Maybe, like, Diabloceratops might beat it out for coolness factor, but it's up there. It's hard to say that the new genus and species, Lokiceratops, is not one of the coolest. Super neat. Definitely, you gotta look up pictures for this one, guys. Look up pictures.
Yeah, a new dinosaur species is also always so cool. Just because you learn more and more from just fossils and stuff, which I think is also really cool.
Yeah, and part of what I like about dinosaurs is the mystery. How much
Yeah.
can you truly learn from bones? We can infer a lot, and we can learn a ton from bones. But for the most part, that's all we're left with, and we're mostly left with partially incomplete or destroyed bones at that. So there's so much to guess and learn, and the discoveries feel bigger because it's like finding the missing piece of a puzzle. Just sometimes you find something and it just clarifies all of it, and you're like, "That's it. This just changed the game." I really think it's cool.
Okay. Now, for my last one, which this one's not a huge problem or anything like that. It's very specific to a village in Ohio. But it's still something that I wanted to talk about because it's something that I could see happening in a lot of places, or at least attempted happening in a lot of places. And it's something as animal keepers we have to watch out for. Um, so in the village of Ashley, Ohio, they're considering a ban on all exotic, wild, and livestock animals, along with a pet limit. So basically, this would ban all species, including fish, birds, reptiles, amphibians, small mammals, and any animals that are not native to Ohio. Um, the only things that would really be exempt are like commonly recognized domesticated animals, which is a very small list for anything other than cats and dogs. Um, and then on top of that, they are wanting to change it to where people could only have 3 dogs or 3 cats, and if they are found to have more than that or found to be in violation, the animal would be either removed uh, or be humanely they reward it humanely destroyed, but basically euthanized. Um, and I think that's something that is really stupid. Um, like obviously, I understand not or wanting to prevent like animal hoarding or like backyard breeders and all that kind of stuff, but I don't think it's such a so much of a common problem in the U.S. that we need to just do bans like this. I think this is gonna hurt that community a lot for people who keep reptiles or anything like that. Um, they did say they'd be grandfathering in animals. This is the only grandfather provision applies to people with more than 3 dogs. So essentially, that ban also would not grandfather in animals other than cats and dogs, or other than like cats. Yeah, the cats and dogs. So I did misread that too, but it, it's not okay. It also shows a lack of knowledge in our representatives and like governors, mayors, all that kind of stuff. It shows that they don't have the knowledge of these animals because they don't really have a reasoning behind these kinds of bans and stuff, and they just hear one or two things and they go off of that. Um, which I think is turning out to be more and more of a problem nowadays when it comes to the reptile hobby, or like just reptile, amphibians, inverts, all that kind of the exotic animal hobby in general. Because these politicians who most of which have never touched, looked at, or even thought of a exotic animal in any way, shape, or form, are making the laws against them without having any type of clue what goes into the care, how hard they are to care, anything like that, when it comes to these animals. Now, luckily, this ban or proposed ban in Ohio, there was an update on the 7th of this year so far, 7th January, that the vote was postponed currently because the mayor and council want to make sure they write up a sound ordinance as well. So hopefully that little ban just gets thrown out and doesn't become a rule because it's. I understand having permits and restrictions on certain things like crocodilians and like venomous snakes and stuff like that. But just outright banning animals because you don't see them as like a pet you'd want essentially, I think is stupid and should not. It just shouldn't be a thing. Like you should not be able to tell someone what type of animals uh, they should enjoy keeping or be able to keep as pets.
Yeah, but there's one thing I wanna note too, is there's a very important word that comes before ban in this in this one specifically, and in a lot of them, proposed ban. So,
Yes.
people don't always understand how this stuff works either. You can propose a whole lot of stuff, and it can get pretty far, even if it's crazy. This happens all the way up until all the way through the federal government, Supreme Court, all of that stuff as well. You'll see it on the news for all sorts of topics, and just we're specifically talking about animals and things. Don't lose your mind because something's proposed. Even if it passes through one phase, our government set up to have a lot of phases in it to prevent insane things from happening. I would bet a lot of money that this ban does not go through. And part of that is about people being vocal. If things like this are happening in your community, you should be vocal about it and you should be like, hey, I don't agree with this. Just make sure it's something you actually like, you truly do. Read through it all yourself, have an understanding of what your opinion is, because it doesn't look good for anybody when you start yelling about things that you don't know about. It discredits all your arguments and stuff in futures and all that. Know what you're talking about. I think that's very important. But be vocal in your own communities, but also don't lose your mind. It's okay. Hey, just understand that ban is a little crazy. It's probably not going through. It probably is not, and it happens all the time. We see things and they're like, "Oh no, they're gonna ban this or that." It's like, well, wait a minute. They're not going to. This doesn't have to be huge news necessarily. And that's something that I think is important and you should probably take with you is just proposed does not mean law yet. Lots of things get proposed and will never go through. It's okay. I'm not saying remain silent. Not saying remain silent at all because that is how that stuff will sneak through is if nobody says anything. But it's not the end of the world. It doesn't mean it's happening in your city, in your town. Just you can chill out, calmly voice your opinion, say, "Hey, this is whack," and you'll be good for the most part. Like I said, they're
Yeah.
already rewriting it to make sure it's a sound policy, which means they already acknowledge that it's a bit excessive.
Yeah. I mean, and y- like you were saying, basically, you just don't lose your minds over a proposed thing. It's not worth it. You will stress yourself to death if you do that because, like Char was saying, there's some crazy stuff that gets proposed. And it doesn't mean that it's ever going to happen. But I will also say another thing is like voice your concerns and stuff to your politicians and representatives and things like that in a calm manner. Like write a letter, send them emails, phone calls, all that kind of stuff. As well, always make sure to fully read through things that they've like proposed and stuff. Because some of them may not sound. This is kind of counterintuitive, but some of them may not sound super crazy. And then you start reading it, and they've hidden something in there that's like absolutely crazy. So always make sure to thoroughly read And it could be vice versa too. It could be that it sounds super crazy, but when you read it, it's really like it's like, oh well, we're gonna go in and take all their animals. It's how you read it at first, but when you really go in there, it's like, oh, for like people who have over 200 animals or something like that. So you want to make sure you thoroughly read them.
There was one, I don't have the article in front of me, so don't none of this is 100% true, but I saw a thing recently that this was still last year, so we'll count it as another news topic. There is a proposition to add reptiles and birds to be considered animals. So the same bills and all that that got rid of puppy mills and make those illegal and have standards and conditions that you have to meet if you're gonna be a breeder, the for cats and dogs and horses and things like that, they're considering adding reptiles and birds to that, which is awesome. But what some people read out of that is they're coming and they're gonna take all your snakes away. You're not allowed to have snakes like that. You need to have permits and licenses and do this and that, and you're subject to search. They're gonna come through all your stuff. But that's not true at all. What they mean is they have standards. They're gonna consider these animals, and you're not allowed to get away with animal abuse anymore. So if you're keeping 400 snakes in very small tubs that are dirty, you're gonna get in trouble, and you should get in trouble. That's animal abuse. They're animals too. If you're a clean facility and you breed just fine, it's not a problem at all. I'm also in favor of that. I think all animals are animals and should be treated with respect. But
Yeah,
some
I
people
100%
didn't read
agree.
through that, and they thought that because you have a snake that's your pet, people are gonna come and look through your whole house and tell you can't have this, you need licenses and stuff. No, they're only coming after big breeders who it's their business. They're making sure that they're doing ethical business. They're dealing with living things. You should treat them with respect. So if you don't have a warehouse that you're breeding reptiles out of, that law will not apply to you.
Yeah, and like the other thing with that is, um, don't always go off of the first thing that you see with those kinds of things. Because like we've talked about with several of the one news articles today, is people have put out their thing almost inciting fear. Being like, "Oh, they're coming for your snakes," or "Oh, this is horrible for this," or blah blah blah, and like that's the title of their article. And if you read just that, then that's the only perspective you get. Then I could see you having the same perspective. But like with the blue tree monitor, um, when you read some people's articles, they're like, "Oh my God, we won't be able to have them anymore. It's going to hurt the population." Blah blah blah. But then when you go and actually read, or I'd seen stuff where they were talking about like, "Oh, you won't be able to sell them across state lines. You won't be able to sell them at all in the U.S." All that kind of stuff. And it's like when you go to actually read the Fish and Wildlife's like actual proposal, not proposal, their I don't know what you'd call it, but essentially the document showing what they've done and like them explaining it and stuff. It's literally just them putting them on the Endangered Species Act. So it just means we can't get new from the wild. It just means it doesn't affect sales in the US. It doesn't affect sales across state lines or anything like that. It just prevents us from getting wild caught animals,
Yeah,
importing
it's the
them.
exact same as Galapagos tortoises. Same rules.
But yeah,
Still
and
have
my
those.
point there
People still
was,
breed them. Still have them.
yeah,
It's all good. But and if you read through the entire thing, if you read and then you're like, "Oh, they're going on the 1973 endangered species thing." Okay, now go read through that, and then you'll have a clearer picture of reality, which is very
yeah,
important.
basically
And that
double check your
having this be a
sources.
news episode is important for that. Like, it's kinda something you have to talk about with the plethora of emotional-based reporting, not necessarily news or opinion-based reporting, not as much of just the straight facts news. A lot of stuff nowadays is somebody's opinion of what's happening rather than this is what's happening, form your own opinion, which is okay, like, that's fine, you just have to be a little more careful about it.
Yeah, so
Like,
basically just check your
all of the
sources.
articles would yeah, check your stuff, make sure it's your opinion, not somebody else's opinion. But overall, 2024, neat year. Some cool stuff happened. My personal favorite one is the king cobras because that's super cool to me. Like we got a technically speaking, we got a new king cobra. We got some more clarification on that. We're going to be able to get better protections for it because one of these new species is endemic to one island in the Philippines. So we're going to be able to get more better protection on that stuff. That's my personal favorite is the king cobra stuff. Really cool. We made some good progress this year, and we're barely scratching the surface. We just picked a couple things we thought were neat, and that was it. Really, we didn't. This is not the biggest things that even happened. This isn't anything crazy.
Yeah, I mean it's just what we found that we thought was really cool and interesting, and we wanted to get it out there, um, and get this information about these articles out there because we thought they were really cool and that people should know about them.
Or at least worth talking about, like, I think it's worth talking about the proposed bans in some of the cities and then the actual bans that are still temporary. There's still only a 240-day ban right now, things can change. On the blue tree monitors, I think it was worth talking about that and having a more I don't wanna say middle of the road approach because I definitely took a side. I'm for the ban, I'll say it. I'm not afraid of
Yeah,
that.
no, same.
But a more reasonable, like, try to get the emotion out of it, like, let's look more at reality, let's try to make a more rational decision rather than emotional on things. I think that was definitely worth talking about.
Yeah, which we will probably do more of these types of episodes in the future, of little news articles that we find that we think are really interesting, um, and want to get out there. And it won't just be on reptiles and stuff. We'll also find ones for plants. We'll also find ones for fish, um, and other exotic animals and pets and things like that. Um, but it won't be like a set time or like, oh, once a month we'll do this or anything like that, I don't think, but we will definitely do more of these. If you enjoyed them, let us know. Give us a like, a rating, uh, subscribe on if you're on YouTube, or follow us on our social medias or on things like Spotify and stuff. TikTok we still have up, but I know it's in the US probably almost 100% getting banned in about 9 days from today when we're recording. So that
Yeah,
probably won't last for
we'll
long.
see on that one.
Yeah,
But that's back
so
to
we'll
the
see.
proposed ban thing. It's not banned yet. Might not be, but it might. Who knows? Follow us while you can.
But if we're gone on TikTok by this time you're reading or listening to this, or TikTok's gone by then, check us out on YouTube and also on Instagram. All of the handles and everything and links will be down in the description. I hope y'all enjoyed the episode, and we will see y'all next week.